Reclaim Your Heart is not a book that I wrote in one sitting. It's not a book that I wrote even in 1 year. Reclaim Your Heart is almost a chronicle of my own life journey and my own life lessons. And so I would say that I put in a lot of life experiences, blood, sweat, and tears into this book. This is a book about how we can start to live in this life without being a slave to this life. About how we can live in dunya without allowing dunya to own us. And this is not an easy thing to do. Many people drown in this ocean of dunya. One of the analogies that I use in the book is an analogy of Imam Razi, rahimahullah, where he says that the hearts are like ships in the ocean of this life. And he compares dunya to an ocean. Now, if you think about the ocean, and alhamdulillah, you have perfect experience with that, being on the coast and having that huge body of water, to look and realize that when you look at the ocean, it is something that is beautiful from the shore. It is something that can also be very useful. But the ocean is something that, as long as the ship remains afloat, as long as the ship does not allow the ocean to enter, then the ship can remain floating. And it's only when the ship allows the ocean to enter it that it sinks. And similarly, he explains that the hearts are like ships in this ocean of dunya. And as long as we keep the dunya outside of our hearts, then the dunya won't destroy us. As long as we keep the dunya in our hand, rather than in our hearts, then the dunya cannot destroy us. Why do people become owned by dunya? Why do people become destroyed in this life? And the answer is just like the ship. All of us know the story of the Titanic, right? The Titanic was this ship. It was the greatest of its time. In fact, it was called the unsinkable ship. They were so proud of their craftsmanship that they actually thought it was unsinkable. And what did the Titanic go down in history as? As one of the most tragic sinkings of a ship. And what is it that destroyed such a massive ship? It was simply that the ocean entered the ship. It was simply that the ship had been damaged due to the iceberg, and then the ocean water entered the ship. And that's all it took to destroy even the most massive and even the most great of ships. And it literally broke it in half and sunk it. And that's exactly what happens to hearts if they allow dunya to enter. When you allow the dunya to become deep inside of your heart, when you allow yourself to love dunya in a way that we're not supposed to love dunya, that's when dunya destroys us. And so, Reclaim Your Heart is about this process, and the title comes from this process of taking our hearts back. Taking our hearts back from dunya and from the things that we've given our hearts to. Because every single person loves something, and every single person actually worships something. Even a non-Muslim, even an atheist, has something that they worship. It might not be Allah, it might not be God, but it is something in their life that they worship. For some people, it's their money. For some people, it's their status. For some people, it's power or fame. For some people, it might be another person in their life. But everyone takes something that they become a slave to. And the question is, what are we slaves to? Whatever we take into our hearts, whatever we absorb into the core of our hearts, becomes our master. And that is why there are people out there who have given their hearts away to money. They have given their hearts away to fame, to being famous. They've given their hearts away to their careers, or they've given their hearts away to power or status. And so Reclaim Your Heart is about the process of taking the heart back. It's about the process of taking our hearts back from the dunya, back from money, back from status, back from power, back from the creation, and then giving it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's not an easy process. It's a process that requires an emptying and then filling. And so in the book, what I talk about at the beginning of the book is I talk about a concept called false attachments. I talk about the process of emptying the heart of false attachments. The process of emptying the heart from these other types of worship. Because when we say, La ilaha illallah, every single one of us says, La ilaha illallah. That's what makes us Muslim. But what does it mean to say La ilaha illallah? La ilaha illallah is not just a statement of the tongue. And La ilaha illallah also does not just mean that there is no God but Allah. La ilaha illallah also means that only Allah is my center. It also means that only Allah can be at the center of my heart. That only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be my master. And that I am a slave to only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That my greatest love and my greatest dependence and my greatest fear and my greatest hope and my greatest dependence and reliance is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so La ilaha illallah is much bigger than some of us make it. So how can we live La ilaha illallah? That is the process of reclaiming your heart. The first part is about detachment. The process of detachment. What does it mean to detach? Detachment is that process of taking out the other things that are filling our hearts. Taking out the other competitors with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the core of our heart. Now, does this mean that we can't love other things? Does this mean we can't love our families, or we can't love our careers or our money? And the answer is no. We can love these things. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us in the Quran about loving these things as we should only love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions certain things that we all love. He says that, say, if your fathers, your parents, or your children, or your spouses, or your relatives, your family, your business, your dwelling, that if any of these things are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger and striving in His way, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَتَرَبَّصُوا. So then wait until Allah brings about His decision. And now, when you hear this ayah, you wonder, are any of these things haram? Is it haram to love our parents? Is it haram to love our children or our spouses? This ayah isn't talking about your boyfriend or your gambling or your alcohol. It's talking about all halal things. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is warning us that if we love even the halal things in the wrong way, we will become destroyed. Even the halal things. If we love our halal money, as we should only love Allah, we will be destroyed by our money. If we love our halal spouse, our halal children, our halal parents. All of these things are halal for us, our halal business. If we love any of these things, as we should only love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we actually become destroyed by the very thing that we love. And so we have to learn, and this is something that many of us are not taught, but we have to learn that there is a right and a wrong way to love. And this is one of the most important lessons that I have and that many of us have had in our lives. That there is a right and wrong way to love our children. There is a right and wrong way to love our spouses. There is a right and wrong way to love our money, our status, our power, our careers, our business. And so this is about how to learn to love in the right way. I begin this book by talking about something quite personal, and that is a dream that I had when I was 17 years old. And in this dream, I see a little girl inside of a masjid, and she asks me a question. She asks me, why do people have to leave each other? I was only 17. I didn't know much about what would come later in my life. But I'm having this dream where this little girl's asking me this question. Why do people have to leave each other? I hadn't experienced this yet, but the question was very personal. And I realized that this question was very relevant to me because I was the type of person who was very highly sensitive, and I was the type of person, from when I was a child, I would get very attached, and not necessarily in a healthy way. So for example, if I was in a daycare and my parents had to leave me for a while, I was one of those kids who would start crying and not stop crying. Other children could calm down. My dad used to say that when you started crying, you wouldn't stop. And so I was very sensitive from the beginning. This was my nature. I was a very sensitive child. And I would get very attached. It was very hard for me when my parents would have to leave. It was very hard for me anytime there was, for example, a problem with one of my friends. I would take it very deep. It would hit me very hard, and I would have trouble coping, and I would have trouble recovering. And I give this analogy that it's like if you take a vase and you put the vase at the edge of the table, that vase is likely to fall and break. And so what I was doing is that through my unhealthy types of attachments to my friends, to everything around me, to moments, to outcomes, I needed things to work out a certain way, or else I was devastated. And so what I was doing is I was setting myself up for disappointment over and over and over because I had these very unrealistic expectations. My expectations were that this life had to be perfect. My expectations were that people around me had to be perfect. My expectations were that my relationships had to be perfect. And if they weren't, I was heartbroken. I didn't know how to accept anything less than perfection. And so what I started to realize, and this happened later on in my life, is that we always learn about love of dunya as being an attachment to material things. We're always taught that love of dunya is an attachment to things like money, or jewelry, or cars, or big lavish houses. But what we're not often taught is that love of dunya, hubb dunya, this destructive disease of the heart, can also be unhealthy attachments to people. And that was the realization that changed my life. I never knew this before. And because I didn't know this, I was continuously getting hurt. I was continuously becoming heartbroken by everyone around me and situations around me. And it was because I was having expectations of this life as if this life was Jannah. And what I realized is that this life is never going to be perfect. And if you expect this life to be perfect, it's like trying to extract water from fire. Trying to put your hand in the fire and get water. You're only going to end up getting burned. And that's what I was doing with my expectations and my attachments. But what I had to realize was that a lot of it had to do with my unhealthy, false attachments to people around me. From the very beginning, the type of attachments that I had with the people in my family, all the way to my friends. And once I realized this, it changed the way I interacted with people, and it changed the way I interacted with this life. Now, I finished the chapter by answering the question in this dream. But what's interesting about the answer that I gave her is that it was a lesson that I would actually spend my life having to learn. And I didn't understand this at the time that I was 17, but it was a very interesting answer that I gave her. She asked me, why do people have to leave each other? And in the dream I said to her, because this life isn't perfect. If it was, what would Jannah be called? What would the next life be called? And so this answer really was deeper than I realized at the time. But what it meant was, when we put our full dependence on this life, when we put our full dependence on the creation, as we should only depend on Allah, it's like a person who's climbing a cliff and holds onto a twig. What happens? That twig is going to snap and that person is going to fall. Now, is it the twig's fault that you held onto it with your full weight and it broke? And the answer is no. It's our fault because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a handhold that never breaks. For us to put our ultimate dependence, our ultimate love, our ultimate hope, and our ultimate reliance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that whoever disbelieves, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى لَا انْفِصَامَ لَهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah that whoever disbelieves in Taghut and believes in Allah has held on to the trustworthy handhold that never breaks. And so this realization was that that's the only handhold that we can possibly expect to never break. We cannot expect this from the people around us because they are not God. We cannot put unrealistic expectations of dunya and everyone in dunya because they are not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have to learn that there is a place for Allah in our hearts and there is a place for people in our hearts. And we can't switch that. We can't exchange that. And if we exchange it, then that will cause a lot of pain in our lives. So I went through this journey, and this was just really the beginning, of trying to, as a highly sensitive person and a perfectionist, to try to learn to have the proper balance of how to love people, give and take from people, have relationships, work, and not allow these things to overtake the core of my heart. To learn to love in the right way, to learn to have and interact with this life as it should be. Where this life is something that we live in, we enjoy in a halal way, but we realize that it is only temporary. And that it is only a bridge to our real life. It is only a bridge to the perfect life. And until we realize that, we continue to get hurt by this life. There's the second half of this chapter, the second chapter, is entitled, People Leave, But Do They Return? And this chapter is about what happens when we lose things in life. Are they lost forever, or do they return in a different way, maybe a better way? And I go and I reflect on the stories that were told in the Quran, the stories of the loss that prophets, peace be upon them, went through. And I reflect on whether or not this loss was permanent, or whether these things were returned. I take, for example, the mother of Musa alayhi salam, and how the mother of Musa alayhi salam had to let go of her son. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told her to put Musa alayhi salam as a baby, can you imagine having to do this? To put your own child in the river. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked the mother of Musa to have enough reliance on him, to have enough tawakkul, to be able to let go of her baby, and to believe in the core of her heart that Allah would return her child. And that required true reliance. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a promise to the mother of Musa alayhi salam. And that promise was, Inna radduhu ilayk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised. And it's not like the promises that a human being gives, because a human being can break their promise. This is the promise of Allah. And He promised the mother of Musa that if you put your trust in Him, He will return what you lost. He will return it to you. And so she was tested in her reliance, but she put her trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah promised her that He would return Musa to her, alayhi salam. Now this is very interesting because he was living at a time where Pharaoh was killing babies as a policy. And so you think about when you're scared for something that you love. Maybe you're scared of losing something that you love. Maybe you're scared of losing your money, or you're scared of losing your status, or you're scared of losing your power, or you're scared of losing someone that you love. Usually what do? Do we hold on tighter, or do we let go? And the answer is we hold tighter. We bring it closer, right? That's our knee-jerk reaction. That's our reflexive reaction. But she's being asked to do the opposite. She's being asked to actually put it in Allah's hands, that thing that she was afraid of losing. The thing that she loved most, she was actually being told to let go and let God. And in that moment, she's being tested, but she is being given a promise. And the promise of Allah is true. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to her, we will return him to you. And not only did He return Musa alayhi salam to his mother, He protected Musa alayhi salam in a way that the mother could not have done had she held on to him. And that's very profound. If she had done what a mother's instinct is to do, which is what? To hold on. She couldn't protect him from Pharaoh. Look at the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only did He protect Musa alayhi salam, He protected, look at the lesson here, look at the sign, pay attention to this. He protected Musa alayhi salam. Not only did He protect him in the house of Pharaoh. Look at the might and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only did He protect Musa alayhi salam in hiding, no, in the house of Pharaoh, to show you that Allah is the protector. Right? Even in literally the mouth of the shark, he was in the house of Pharaoh, and Allah protected him there. And in fact, as a sign, Allah made Pharaoh himself raise him. And he was the one who was killing the babies. He was the one who Musa alayhi salam was trying to escape. And Allah's in charge. See, it shows that Allah's in charge. Allahu Akbar. Because Allah made Pharaoh raise him. So not only was he protected, but he was protected in the houses of Pharaoh. And that's Allah. But look at the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He could have taken Musa alayhi salam and just protected him, and the mother never saw him again. Right? But he made a promise to the mother. And this is also something that it hit me really deep when I read this. Is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He وَرَضَضْنَاهُ إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He returned Musa to his mother. But what really struck me is the reason Allah gives of why He returned Musa to his mother. كي تقر عينها ولا تحزن ولا تعلم أن وعد الله. So beautiful. He says that He returned Musa to his mother, and I want you to just realize that this is a historic event. This is something in the revelation that people will read till the end of time. And look at why He did it. He said, in order to give comfort to his mother, so that her eyes would be comforted, and that she wouldn't be sad. Isn't that powerful? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the sadness of one woman was that important to the Lord of the worlds. The feelings of one mother. You know, sometimes this is the thing, right? We sometimes go through life, right? And we feel like, nobody cares. Or, nobody knows what we go through. No one knows what I'm feeling. Or maybe no one cares about my feelings. And sometimes we might feel that our feelings are insignificant. And we might feel that it's insignificant to people. But look what Allah is showing us, and showing people till the end of time, that the emotions of one woman were that important to the Lord of the worlds, that He did a historic thing, and He brought back Musa to the mother. And then finally, He says, وَلَتَعْلَمَ أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. And so that she will know that the promise of Allah is true. Now, these stories are not just stories. These stories are lessons. These stories are inspirations for us in our lives. Because sometimes in life, we're going to face situations, inshallah, we never have to let go of our children. But we will face situations of loss. We will face situations where we have to let go. And these stories are to inspire us and to make sure that we know that the promise of Allah is true. I really, really want to emphasize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just tell us stories so that we can read them to our children before bed. Allah tells us stories to inspire our lives and to give us direction when we face difficulties or when we face certain situations in our lives. Another story that I speak about and gave me a lot of inspiration in my life, and I write about in Reclaim Your Heart, is the story of Musa alayhi salam, when he's now an adult and he's standing in front of the Red Sea. And I love this story because this shows the training of a prophet, the tawakkul of a prophet, the reliance of a prophet. And then what happens when a person has that type of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So Allah tells us in the Quran, فَلَمَّا تَرَاءَ الْجَمْعَانِ قَالَ أَصْحَابُ مُوسَى إِنَّا لَمُدْرَكُونَ. That when the armies, so you have the people of Musa, Bani Israel, and they're trying to escape. And now Pharaoh and his army are approaching. So when they saw the army approaching, the people with Musa alayhi salam are starting to panic. Inna lamudrakun. They had a panic. They said, indeed, we will be overtaken. Now, I want you guys to just imagine for a moment the situation they're actually in. There's this giant body of water in front of them, and there's a superpower army behind them. Where are they going to go? Think about it. Where are they going to go? Are they going to fly? Where are they going to go? Are they going to swim? Are they going to drown? What are they going to do? And so the reaction of Bani Israel is very human. You know? We feel this way sometimes when we feel trapped in life. We don't see a way out. We feel trapped. And sometimes we respond just like Bani Israel. We respond with, Inna lamudrakun. We're going to be overtaken. That's it. We sometimes fall into despair. We lose hope when we feel trapped. You know when you face a problem in life and you don't see a solution? You don't see a way out. Does that happen to us? Yes. We might not be stuck in front of the Red Sea with an army behind us, but do we not feel trapped sometimes? Maybe we feel trapped by financial problems or relationship problems or health problems, family problems. And when we feel trapped, and when we don't see a way out, do we respond like Bani Israel? Indeed, we will be overtaken. Inna lamudrakun. That's it. We despair. We give up hope. But this is what's so powerful. Look at the response of Musa alayhi salam. قَالَ كَلَّا. قَالَ كَلَّا. He says, no way, absolutely not. You know, in Arabic, the word kalla means, it doesn't just mean no. It means by no means, absolutely not, never. You know what I mean? It's very emphatic. He says, kalla. Why? Now, another thing I want to point out here is he's confident. But why is he confident? You know, sometimes we might be confident in a problem because don't worry, I have money in the bank. Or we might be confident in a problem, don't worry, I have supporters in my family. Or don't worry, I have my power to rely on. Or don't worry, it's going to be okay, I have influence. Right? So you might be confident because of these things. But why is he confident? In fact, he's in a situation where he can rely on nothing except Inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdi. He says, indeed my Lord is with me, and he will get me through this. Indeed my Lord is with me, and he will guide me through this. It is so mind-blowing that he could have that type of confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, it's easy for us to have confidence when we know the way out. Well, it's going to be okay because here's the solution, right? But what happens when we have no idea what the solution is? What happens when we have no idea what the way out is? then can we still be confident? And so he has confidence even though he has no idea how he's going to get out. قَالَ كَلَّا إِنَّ مَعِيَ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينِ. He will get me out of this. Now what happens next? Well, first, and I want to point this out because this is extremely relevant and important, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him to take an action. One of the misunderstandings we have about tawakkul, about relying on Allah, is that sometimes we think that if I'm relying on Allah, I don't take action. We sometimes think that relying on Allah means I sit and I'm passive and I do nothing and I just wait to be saved. But Allah asked him to take an action. Even though it was his reliance on Allah that saved him, but Allah told him to take an action. And what was that action? He told him to take his staff and strike the sea. And what does Allah do? Allah splits the sea from him. Allah made a way out for him from a place he could have never imagined. And that is what happens when you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Reclaim Your Heart is about Tawheed. What is Tawheed? If I ask you what is Tawheed, you'll say it is to bear witness that there is no God but Allah. And that's absolutely true, that is Tawheed. But what is Tawheed in love? What is Tawheed in hope? What is Tawheed in reliance? What is Tawheed in dependence? What is Tawheed in fear? What does that look like? And that's really something that many of us, we don't understand. Many of us, we say La ilaha illallah easy with our tongues. But we don't have Tawheed in love. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. And from among people, there are those who take rivals with Allah. Now when we think about shirk, what do we usually think about? Praying to a statue? Maybe making dua to other than Allah, saying Allah has a son, God forbid. A'udhu billah. But here Allah is talking about taking a rival with Him. يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. They love them as they should only love Allah. This is rivalry in love. It is when we love other things, when we take rivals with Allah, not in a stone idol, but in our money, and in our status, and in our power, and in our children, and in our spouses. That we take these other things, يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. They love them as they should only love Allah. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. And those who believe are most intense in their love for Allah. Many of us don't understand that rivalry with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that shirk, that tawheed is not only about praying to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is tawheed in the way we love. There is tawheed in the way we depend. Are we dependent on our status? Are we dependent on our power? Are we dependent on our money? Or are we dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I talk about hubb al-dunya and the meanings of hubb al-dunya. What is the love of dunya? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, اعلموا إنما حياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة. اعلموا إنما الحياة الدنيا لعب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says no, that the life of this world is play. When Allah begins, He says that this life is play. Now, if you think back to when you first entered this life, when someone first enters dunya, what is most important to that individual? See, right now we have a babysitting room for children who've just recently entered this dunya, right? What do you think is happening in that room? Play, toys, right? Because that's what matters to a child. You can sit there and read a child, a beautiful excerpt from Shakespeare and they don't care. You can give a child a fancy Armani suit, they don't care, as long as they can put it in their mouth. But a child wants a toy. A child just wants to play. So to a child, all of this dunya is just about play. لعب. اعلموا إنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو. Then Allah second in this chronology, Allah says in this list, second He says, lahwun. Lahwun means entertainment. Lahwun means to be entertained. Think about this for a second. After you grow up a little bit, so you're not playing with rattles anymore, but maybe now you're around middle school age, 10, 12 years old. What's the most important thing to you? Anyone who's ever worked with a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, or children of this age, or have children of this age, know that their favorite thing to say is, I'm bored. I'm bored. This is boring. Right? This is boring. If they were sitting right now here, they'd say, this is boring. Why? Because they want to be entertained. They want to be stimulated constantly, right? And now everyone's got an iPhone or something to constantly stimulate them. Video games, there's no moment that they can just sit. They have to be entertained and stimulated. This is called love. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His wisdom, He created us and He knows our nature. After saying la'ib, He says la. Now, what's third in the list? La'ib wa lahw wa zinatun. Let me ask you a question. How many people have teenagers in the room? How many people know any teenagers? Okay. Teenagers, they don't care so much about a rattle. Maybe they don't care as much about, being stimulated. But there's something else that's very important to a teenager. And that's how they look. It's how they dress. Now, by the way, this is the time in one's life where it'll take 2 hours to get ready, right? You know what I'm talking about. This is the time when eating disorders become, epidemic. This is the time because people are very concerned about the way they look. We have body image issues. We're worried about, what we're wearing. Brand names are very important at this age, right? You know if you're a parent, but it has to be a certain brand, right? It has to be a specific type of clothes, and very concerned about how they appear. You know what that's called? Zina. It's adornment. Look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that know that the life of this world is what first? Play. And then what second? Lahu. Entertainment, stimulation. And then third is zina. Is beautification, adornment. Where we're very concerned about this. So we get a little older, and now we're going to university. We're starting to build a career. And now it's not as important what you're wearing or what you look like. It's not as important the entertainment. It's not as important the rattle. But now what's important to you? وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَكُمْ. Allah says boasting between one another. You know the showing off, trying to prove yourself, comparing yourself to others. It's called social media, right? We have a platform for it now, right? We have a platform for it now. So now you don't just compare yourself with your neighbor, you can compare yourself to people on the other side of the world. And guess what? Now you don't just show off to your neighbor, now you can show off to people on the other side of the world. And so this tafakhurun baynakum is to boast. It's to show off. It's this sort of mutual showing off. Well, you know, if you get something new or something fancy, it's like, it's no fun unless you put it on display, right? It's not, it's like I say, it's like, you know, your nikah isn't fully, you know, it's not fully halal until everyone knows about it and everyone sees the photos. You know, you feel like there's this need to put your blessings on display. And whether that's showing off or it's not is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is a culture. It's a culture of showing off. It's a culture of boasting. You know, that showing our money, showing our status, showing our power, showing the gifts that Allah has given us. We want other people to see. And this is part of our boasting between one another. And this happens as we, you know, get to that stage of life. وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَهُمْ. And then later on, when we settle down and now we have children and we've made more money, and now what does Allah say? وَتَكَاثُرٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. And now it's about trying to make more and more of money to compete in making more. This takathur. You want more and more, you amass more and more of wealth and children. Now, what do we use to show off? See, when we're kind of like building ourselves in university, we're building our careers and stuff, we're talking about our own accomplishments. You know, like, what are you going to show off on your social media when you're in university? You're going to show off that you graduated. You're going to want to show that you got into this medical school, or you got this degree, or you got this job, or you got this promotion, right? You got this acceptance into this, this program, this university, this job. So it's a lot about sort of proving yourself and your accomplishments. But then when you grow and you settle and you have a family, now what do you use to show off? Your wealth and your children. Right? It's not so much about your accomplishments anymore, because now your accomplishments are your wealth and your children. You know? So we use our wealth to show off, and we use our children to show off. Like, look what my kid did. What'd your kid do? You know? And then there's the comparisons. My child was a hafid, and my child, you know, did their hifz in 2 months, you know? Like, so quickly, you know, we show off with our children. You know, your cousin spent this much on their wedding, how much do we have to spend? You know, this kind of idea. There's competition with the children and with wealth. Now, Allah knows us, right? Allah knows us. Allah is teaching us a very, very important and deep lesson in this ayah. He says all of these things in chronological order. Look at the miracle of the Quran. He says all of these things in chronological order, and then what does he say after all that? كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا ثُمَّ يَكُونُ حُطَامًا. He says it's like a heavy rain that makes the farmer very happy. See, all of these things, the la'ib, the play, the lahu, the zina, the play, the zina, the adornment, the amusement, the boasting between one another, the amassing and the showing off, all of it is like a heavy rain that makes the farmer very happy for a while. Why? Because of the vegetation that the rain brings. But then what happens? كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا ثُمَّ يَكُونُ حُطَامًا. But what happens to that vegetation? It starts to dry up. It starts to become yellow, and then it just becomes debris. And this is the lesson Allah is teaching us about dunya. We can enjoy these things in dunya. We can enjoy the play for a while. We can enjoy the entertainment for a while. We can enjoy the beautification for a while. We can enjoy this, boasting between one another, the showing off, the money, the children. But it is temporary. And Allah is teaching us that all of these things are what we chase in dunya. But these things will eventually dry up. They will eventually turn yellow, and they will eventually become debris. And after all of this has passed away, all of the things that we chase, our money, our play, our adornment, everything, after it's all passed away, what remains? After that's all passed away, only one of two things will remain. Allah tells us in this ayah. And that is the mercy and good pleasure of Allah, or it is His punishment. And that's it. What is Allah teaching us in this ayah? Allah is teaching us how to have perspective. It's just about perspective. Islam is not a religion that tells us that we cannot have nice things. Islam is not a religion that tells us that we have to spend day and night in the masjid in order to worship Allah. That's not Islam. Islam is not a religion that tells you that in order to be close to Allah, you can't get married, or you can't have children, or you can't have a job, or you can't have friends, or even that you can't enjoy yourself. No. Islam is about perspective. It's about having these things, enjoying these things, being involved in these things. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he got married, he was a father, he was a friend, he was a leader, he was all of these things.